It looked like a throne, crafted of iron and cruel genius, its back stretched high with ornamental spikes. Armrests were studded with nails. A pan beneath the seat held glowing coals. And once a body was strapped in, there was no mercy. The moment the fire was lit, the screams began. This wasn't just a method of execution. It was a spectacle, a statement, and for one medieval ruler, a personal obsession. While kings built cathedrals, he commissioned a chair of torment. While courts debated justice, he burned enemies alive in silence. This wasn't ancient Rome. This was Europe, in the supposed age of chivalry. And yet, hidden within the walls of his castle, he used the chair again and again, on traitors, lovers, monks, even children, until the air itself reeked of cooked flesh. For centuries, the iron chair haunted the records of medieval torture. But few know the truth. It wasn't the chair that was evil. It was the man who sat beside it, smiling. This is the story of the throne of agony, and the monster who made it his legacy. Now let's begin. In the year 1427, deep in the Carpathian Mountains, a minor noble named Istvan Bathory inherited a crumbling fortress and a fractured legacy. His bloodline was once noble, even revered, but war, scandal, and a string of gruesome family deaths had reduced his name to ash. Bathory, however, was not content with obscurity. He was consumed by a desire to reclaim power and punish those who had laughed at his family's fall. He began with fire. A blacksmith named Lenko was summoned from the farthest reaches of the kingdom, a man whispered to build living machines. He'd made chastity belts with teeth, cages shaped like wolves, masks that suffocated. But this time, the commission was different. Bathory wanted something permanent, something symbolic, something terrifying. Lenko delivered. The result was not a chair, it was an altar, constructed entirely from iron. It resembled a high-backed throne with hundreds of inward-facing spikes along the back, seat, and arms. Metal shackles for wrists and ankles ensured no escape. Beneath the seat, an iron tray where red-hot coals would be shoveled. Slowly, relentlessly, the chair would begin to heat. The victim wouldn't bleed. They would cook. The first to try it was a stable boy accused of stealing dried meat. Bathory invited his noble guests to witness the demonstration of loyalty. As the boy screamed, his flesh popping, the guests turned pale, but none protested. Bathory had found his stage, and the chair was now his centerpiece. But Bathory's obsession wasn't just cruelty. It was transformation. He turned executions into elaborate rituals, chanting before the flame was lit, delivering mock sermons, even dressing in crimson robes. He claimed the chair was holy judgment, that fire purified the guilty, and that their screams? They were proof of sin leaving the body. Each death was documented, but not as punishment, as performance. He brought artists to sketch the contorted bodies. He held banquets after executions. Nobles feared him, but they also admired him. Because when Bathory ruled through fear, taxes were paid, peasants obeyed, and rivals vanished in silence. Soon, the chair became legend. They whispered that the metal fed on blood, that it remembered, that those who sat in it never truly died. And Bathory? He reveled in every tale. In time, the chair was no longer just a tool. It was a throne that ruled not through law, but through terror. But even monsters have rules. And when Bathory broke his own, the iron would claim more than just strangers. It would claim his soul. By 1430, Bathory was no longer a minor noble. He had become the authority in his region, a warlord cloaked in robes of nobility, commanding with the precision of a sadist and the theatricality of a priest. His enemies feared his armies, yes. But more than that, they feared the chair. Because when Bathory issued an invitation to his castle, you couldn't be sure if it was for a feast or for a burning. It began with his rivals, landowners, judges, a bishop who once called him unfit. They were accused of treason, heresy, witchcraft. The charges were always vague, but the punishment was always the same. A public execution in the throne room, with the iron chair at center stage. And these were no ordinary burnings. They were productions. Bathory would summon the accused, dress them in ceremonial robes, and read aloud fabricated confessions, claims of devil worship, poisoning wells, seducing nuns. Then, with the room silent, he would lower them onto the heated iron, shackling them in place as coals glowed beneath their feet. The fire would do the rest. And while skin blackened and peeled, while screams echoed down stone corridors, Bathory would stand still, watching, unflinching. Sometimes he'd smile. Sometimes he'd weep, claiming sorrow for their souls and offering prayers for the damned. This wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about control. Bathory had transformed torture into a tool of governance. Fear was his greatest weapon, and the iron chair was its symbol. Word spread quickly. Peasants told stories of glowing figures walking the battlements at night, spirits of the charred, still bound to the seat that killed them. Children who misbehaved were threatened not with the rod, but with the chair. Entire villages swore loyalty simply to avoid suspicion. But it wasn't just rural superstition keeping Bathory in power. He was cunning. He funded churches, rebuilt roads, and protected trade routes. When foreign dignitaries visited, he presented himself as enlightened, quoting scripture and commissioning paintings of martyrdom and penance. He knew how to balance the horror with holiness. Until one day, he broke the balance. Her name was Alona. She wasn't a traitor, or a heretic, or a criminal. She was a kitchen maid, just 16, and she had seen something she wasn't supposed to, an execution prepared in secret, involving a priest who had criticized Bathory's rule. Alona made the mistake of speaking about it. Bathory made an example. In front of his entire court, he accused her of seducing the clergy and practicing sorcery. But this time, something shifted. There was no confession, no pretense of due process. Just an immediate sentence, death by fire. Some nobles averted their eyes. One reportedly vomited. Still, no one intervened. Alona's cries, pleading for her mother, screaming that she was innocent, were heard for nearly 20 minutes before her lungs failed. But it was what came next that disturbed even Bathory's most loyal guards. That night, he ordered her ashes collected in a goblet and drank them. He claimed it was sacrament, that he had consumed the darkness to protect his land. And so, fire became not just punishment, but ritual, religion, doctrine. One noble, in a letter later recovered from the Habsburg archives, described Bathory's castle as a house of hell disguised in piety. But there was one person who would soon challenge that hell. A quiet monk, one who had witnessed too much, and was willing to burn if it meant revealing the truth. He arrived in silence. Brother Miklos was not a man of war, nor politics, nor ambition. He had lived most of his adult life in a small monastery tucked into the cliffs east of the Tisza River, copying manuscripts and tending to the sick. But when whispers of Bathory's holy chair reached even the monastic walls, when stories of glowing iron and ritual executions filtered through trembling lips, Miklos left his abbey and walked for 7 days through mud and frost, straight to the gates of Bathory's domain. He brought no weapon, only scripture. He requested audience as a man of faith, an offer of spiritual counsel to a ruler praised for his piety. Bathory welcomed him. He admired holy men, and he especially enjoyed breaking them. At first, Bathory saw Miklos as a harmless curiosity. The monk's sermons were meek, his voice soft. He quoted psalms at dinner and blessed every stone he stepped on. But Miklos was not here to flatter. He was watching, and over the next 2 weeks, he saw more than he could stomach. In the Great Hall, Miklos witnessed 3 executions, 2 accused of theft, 1 of blasphemy, all cooked in the chair. He saw the guards remove what was left of the bodies with hooked poles. He saw the skin peel from faces. He saw a woman give birth while burning alive. Miklos said nothing, but he recorded everything. In the margins of his Bible, he began documenting times, names, even the order in which Bathory added coals beneath the seat. He made sketches of the chair's structure and whispered prayers over the iron after each death. On the 15th day, he approached Bathory privately and told him, God watches. Even fire cannot hide the soul. Bathory, amused, invited him to stay longer. He claimed that God guided the flames, that Miklos should witness what true justice looked like. Miklos accepted, but he began to plot. He needed to escape, to smuggle the evidence out, to warn the church of what was happening inside this mountain fortress. But someone was already watching him. Alona, the kitchen maid who would later be burned alive, had taken notice of the monk's quiet investigations. She began helping him in secret, sneaking scraps of paper, passing notes between rooms, hiding records under stone tiles in the cellar. Together, they formed a fragile alliance, one sworn to expose a madman cloaked in holiness. On the 22nd night, they planned their escape. Miklos would leave before dawn, taking a servant's horse. Ilona would stall the guards by spilling wine in the great hall, drawing them away from the stables. But they never had the chance. A betrayal. A guard, loyal to Bathory and suspicious of the maid's glances, followed them. Their plan unraveled. Ilona was seized first, then Miklos, and Bathory was furious. Ilona's execution was swift. He didn't bother with ceremony this time. No crowd, no sermon, just her, the chair, and Bathory's cold eyes. But Miklos, he was saved for something special. Bathory staged it like theater. He invited nobles from 4 counties, summoned clergymen, even brought in painters to immortalize the moment. The monk would be a symbol of divine disobedience, a heretic disguised in robes. Miklos was stripped and bound to the chair. But instead of screaming, he prayed. Loudly, over the flames, over the crackle of his own skin. He recited psalms until his throat blistered. Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, his last words, witnesses claimed, where this fire cannot kill what is already free. And then, silence. The room reportedly went cold. Even Bathory did not smile that day. But Miklos had succeeded. Ilona had hidden the monk's journal inside a hollowed floorboard in the chapel crypt. It would not be found for another decade. But when it was, it would ignite something far more dangerous than fire: revenge. The castle loomed, a fortress of stone and shadow, perched on the edge of a mountain as if daring God to strike it down. Within its walls, over 100 souls had been cooked alive. The chair sat in its usual place, polished, reverent, ready. But after the deaths of Ilona and brother Miklos, something inside those walls shifted. Bathory grew paranoid, not of enemies with swords, but of ghosts with eyes. He ordered all chapel crypts sealed. He moved the chair from the great hall to a hidden chamber below the castle, accessible only through a false wall behind the wine cellar. The executions continued, but now they were quieter. Secret. He stopped inviting nobles. He claimed it was God's will that judgment be carried out without spectacle. But the truth was simple. He was afraid. The monk's final prayer echoed in his mind. The smell of burning scripture still clung to the air. His sleep became fractured. Servants reported that he screamed through the night, shouting names only the dead would know. He began seeing things. Blackened faces watching from windows. Blood dripping from walls that had none. The iron chair whispering in the voice of his mother, who had died in childbirth. He believed the chair was alive. So he did the unthinkable. He tried to bury it. Under cover of night, Bathory summoned 6 of his most trusted guards. Together, they carried the chair down into the mountain catacombs beneath the fortress, a forgotten labyrinth once used for plague burials. There, in the deepest chamber, they lowered the chair into a stone pit and sealed it with bricks and pitch. Bathory recited prayers. The guards swore never to speak of it. But the next morning, 2 of those men were dead. One found hanging in the bell tower, eyes gouged out. The other found in the well, his skin boiled, though the water was cold. Bathory panicked. He demanded the chair be dug back up and returned to the chamber. When the bricks were removed, they found it untouched, not even dusty, still warm. The executions resumed. But this time, the chair chose its victims. Castle servants began vanishing. First a cook, then a scribe, then a child who had been seen peering into the chamber keyhole. Bathory claimed they had fled, but guards whispered otherwise. One servant boy, found half-mad in the stables, claimed the chair opened its eyes and that the iron had begun to move. It was now part of the castle. Or worse, the castle was part of it. Every wall seemed to pulse with heat. The chapel pews cracked as if dried in an oven. Even food spoiled faster. Some called it a curse. Others said Bathory had become more than a man. In 1438, during an unusually harsh winter, the village below the castle rose in revolt. Led by a former soldier and a surviving relative of brother Miklos, the villagers scaled the mountain, torches in hand. Many would die before reaching the gates, their bodies torn apart by Bathory's guards or frozen on the slopes. But 22 made it inside. What they found shocked even them. Bodies, half-burned, stacked behind walls. Hidden compartments filled with bones. A chamber of books, written in Bathory's hand, describing his belief that fire was divine, that suffering revealed truth, and that the chair was an angel of judgment. They never found Bathory. The man had vanished, but the chair remained, sitting quietly in its chamber, surrounded by soot-stained stone and the stench of charred history. They tried to destroy it. They couldn't. They tried to move it. It wouldn't budge, so they buried it. This time, not with bricks, but with salt, scripture, and the bones of the dead. And for a time, the fire slept. But evil doesn't die. It waits. Because 50 years later, the castle would be sold, and the new owners would find something beneath the chapel floors. A map, a warning, and a key. The year was 1487. The Bathory Castle, long since abandoned, vines twisting through its battlements, crows nesting where once nobles feasted, was purchased by a Bohemian nobleman named Yanek Horvat. He was a man of logic, a skeptic of old superstition, and a self-proclaimed restorer of forgotten greatness. To him, the rumors of iron thrones and whispering ghosts were just that, rumors. He planned to turn the castle into a hunting lodge. But before the first hunting party arrived, Horvat ordered the old chapel floors replaced. The stone slabs had warped from centuries of frost. Workers pried them up and found something beneath. A compartment carved into the earth. Inside, a scroll, yellowed and brittle. It warned in Latin, "He who wakes the flame shall be devoured by it." And beside it, a rusted key. The castle steward begged Horvat to destroy it. But Horvat laughed. "Hell is a story told by cowards," he said. Then he opened the sealed chamber beneath the wine cellar. What the workers found stunned them. The air was thick, like soot and sulfur had been trapped for decades. In the center of the stone room sat the chair, blackened, spiked, unmoved, but untouched by time. No rust, no wear. Horvat, now consumed by curiosity, ordered it removed. It took 12 men and chains reinforced with iron, but eventually they hauled it up from the pit and placed it in the Great Hall. Within a week, one of those men had vanished. The others reported hearing crackling, even when no fire was lit. Despite this, Horvat pressed on. He invited guests to the castle through lavish feasts and unveiled the chair as a relic of medieval hysteria. He even sat in it and laughed. He lived only 3 more days. His body was discovered in the courtyard, not burned, but boiled. Every inch of skin blistered, internals ruptured. No fire had been lit. No one had heard a scream. One of the guests that night, an Italian scholar named Adriano Belluzzi, recorded what he saw in his journal. The chair was cold, and yet the room stank of fat and death. I believe the throne eats heat from the soul, not the air. It dines on essence. After Horvat's death, the castle was declared cursed. It was abandoned once more. But the chair wasn't buried this time. It was chained to the ground, sealed inside the chapel, guarded by hired swords. But none of it mattered, because over the next century, every single person tied to the Bathory estate, whether by blood, contract, or curiosity, would suffer strange and violent ends. One was found roasted in his bed, though no fire had been set. Another drowned in boiling spring water. A priest sent to exorcise the castle burst into flames as he opened his Bible. By the early 1500s, the chair had become legend once again, a relic of horror, a throne of punishment. And in 1523, the Vatican quietly dispatched a team of scholars and exorcists. Their mission, to retrieve the chair or destroy it. They brought holy water, iron tools, relics of saints. They lasted 2 nights. On the third, the chapel exploded. Windows burst outward in a rush of heat. The roof collapsed. When the smoke cleared, only one body was found. It was bent backwards, as if something had tried to fold him into a seat. The chair? Still there. Not a scratch. Word of the failed mission spread. Other relic hunters came. Occultists. Secret societies. One group, the Black Crown Society, claimed the chair was a gateway. That Bathory had not died, but ascended through fire. That the chair was a portal to a purifying realm beyond flesh. Others believed it was a fragment of hell itself, left behind by angels who rebelled. No one could agree on its origin, only its hunger, and its refusal to die. By the time the 17th century began, the castle had collapsed into ruin. The chair was never officially removed, But hikers in the region still report strange findings. Circles of scorched earth where nothing grows, iron nails arranged in the shape of a throne, the sound of crackling fire, echoing in empty valleys. And once, in 1971, a local boy went missing. They found his boots, and nearby, a chair-shaped depression in the snow, still warm. The boy was never seen again. The villagers say, never speak its name, never follow the sound of fire, because once you sit in the throne of agony, you never get up. By the time the 20th century rolled in, the iron chair was no longer just a relic of forgotten cruelty. It had become a myth soaked in blood. Historians dismissed the legend as medieval exaggeration. Psychologists labeled the tale a cultural hallucination, proof of how trauma and oral tradition distort reality. But for those who had touched the records, visited the ruins, or spoken with the locals still whispering behind closed shutters at dusk, there was no doubt. Something real had been left behind. In 1936, a team of German occult researchers from the Ahnenerbe, a Nazi-affiliated group obsessed with supernatural artifacts, attempted to excavate the ruins of Bathory Castle. They were seeking power, dark power. What they found instead was silence. The entire expedition vanished. Their final telegram read simply, "The chair is awake." After the war, Soviet authorities seized the area and sealed it off. On official maps, the ruins were marked as unstable terrain. But satellite thermal imaging in the late 1960s revealed an anomaly, a persistent heat source in the mountain emanating from beneath the ruins, as if a fire still burned underground. Nothing flammable had existed there for centuries. Then came the archaeologists. In 1994, a private team funded by an obscure Eastern European benefactor was granted permission to investigate the chapel vaults beneath the ruins. They descended with cameras, breathing masks, protective suits. What they brought back was just one thing, a video. It has never been released publicly. But the archivist who leaked its description reported what it showed. A room, still sealed, lined with scorched stone. In the center, illuminated by a flickering light, the chair, still standing. No dust, no cobwebs. And, on its armrest, a fresh human tooth. The team never returned. The footage was buried. The ruins were sealed again. Today, Bathory Castle is lost to the public. Officially, it's collapsed. Unstable. Dangerous. But locals know better. They say that sometimes, in the dead of winter, smoke curls upward from where the chapel once stood. That if you stand at the edge of the ruins and press your ear to the ground, you can hear screaming, not from pain, but from somewhere deeper. From inside the iron itself. Because the chair was never just a tool of death. It was an altar. A throne for a twisted god. A relic forged not just in iron, but in intention. In cruelty. In the belief that pain purifies and fire redeems. And as long as someone, somewhere, believes in that, the chair cannot die. And so it waits. In darkness. In silence. In heat that never fades. Waiting for the next ruler. The next priest. The next soul desperate enough to use it. Because evil never vanishes. It just takes a seat. The iron chair wasn't merely a device of execution. It was a monument to the darkest parts of the human soul, where power feeds on fear, where cruelty becomes performance, and where justice twists into spectacle. Bathory didn't invent torture, but he perfected it. He gave it ritual, gave it language, gave it meaning, and in doing so, he turned murder into a form of worship. We like to believe that history's monsters were born in distant, ignorant times. But the truth is more terrifying. They were admired, respected, followed, and their tools, be they weapons or words, can live on. In iron, in tradition, even in us. So the next time you hear the story of a ruler who promises purity through pain, or a system that claims punishment as salvation, ask yourself, who's sitting in the chair? And who lit the fire? If this story haunted you, you're not alone. Subscribe to Mindblown History for more true stories that pierce the veil of time and expose the strange, dark, and forgotten truths beneath it. Leave a comment. Would you have dared sit in the chair? And if you're brave enough, watch our next episode, The Orphanage That Vanished Overnight, and the 42 Children That Were Never Found. History isn't dead. It's waiting to be remembered.